Hey there everybody, how's it going? Nice to see you again. Thanks for coming out today. So I'm up here at the High Lake, Morgan Lake in Northeast Oregon. It's about, I don't know, it's around 5,000 feet elevation. It's not that high, but yeah, beautiful day. Winter, well not winter, but fall has definitely come. Feels like winter because 3 days ago it was 90 degrees. Now it's like 45 degrees, and that makes a big difference. I had to put the gloves on, hands got cold. Just not used to the weather. But today we're going to talk about sharpness and how to get tack sharp images. And there's a few things you can do to ensure that your images are as sharp as they can be. So walking on this field here, I'm surrounded by ponderosa pine trees. They don't get as big as they do up in Eagle Cap because the elevation's higher. And I don't know, it could be soil, whatever, but we're definitely a little higher. The ones down around 3,000, 4,000 feet, and I guess it has to do with the water too, the rainfall. But anyway, behind me, like the moss on these branches is really interesting. So I'm going to take a few shots of that. Just as kind of a warm-up and just because it caught my eye. So I'm going to go handheld for these shots, and the first thing we're going to talk about is stability. So when I go handheld, obviously if I have in-body image stabilization, which my X-T5 does have, I'm going to make sure that's set to the right settings, whatever they may be. In this particular instance, it's on. And then I'm going to brace the camera. So you don't want to be taking your pictures out here, right? You want to get like two hands on the camera, get a nice solid hold, and then press the camera up to your eye so you have like 3 points. 1, 2, 3. 3 points of contact to get that camera as steady and as stable as possible. So I'm going to explore this tree over here. So here's some examples of some sharp images that I've taken this year. It's been an interesting year. I haven't gone on any really overnight trips anywhere for photography. I've done a few day trips, but it's been very rewarding. I'm very pleased with the images I've captured so far, and my 2023 folio is coming along nicely. I have 6, 7 images, maybe 8 so far, and I will be putting the 2023 folio box set up for pre-order coming up here in the next couple of weeks, so watch for that. But in the meantime, here's a sneak preview of a couple of my sharp images that I've taken so far this year and what we're striving for in terms of tack sharp images. So we've already talked about handheld. Now let's talk about tripods. Now obviously this tripod is pretty lightweight, and this is the Siru T025X traveler tripod in carbon fiber, and it is very lightweight. I actually use this for video. This is my second tripod for video. The only complaint I have about it is it's a little short. The important thing, or the first aspect of using a tripod, is to have it with you. Secondly, I'd highly recommend having some kind of a quick release system, and I would also recommend having an L bracket for your camera. And thirdly, when you put your camera on your tripod, make sure that all your points of tightening it down are tight and it's not wibbly wobbly. The legs usually you can tell because it starts falling over, right? But a point that it always seems to get you, and has for my whole career, is if your center column is not tight. Also, I extend the center column because, like I said, this is a little bit of a short tripod, so I end up looking down into the video. But for video, that's allowable. But for stills photography, if you want ultimate sharpness, you want the heaviest tripod and the most sturdy tripod that you can comfortably afford the weight and size. So for my stills photography with my Fuji cameras, my APS-C Fuji cameras, that would be the Gitzo 1545 Traveler in carbon fiber. And I have a Really Right Stuff, I think it's the 35 head on it. Anyway, I'll show it to you when I switch it. Right now I'm using that tripod for the video, but I'm going to switch out. And so for stills photography, if you can get away with it, don't extend the center column, because the center column can add a little wibbly wobbly into it. And the first point in terms of getting tack sharp images that I'm trying to make here is stability. So let's switch tripods and we'll take some shots over here. So like I said, don't extend your center column if you don't have to. So that's a big plus there in terms of stability. And the second thing is, if you're going to have problems with your connections and your tightening down of stuff, it's going to be in this area right here by the tripod head. And the spinning is a problem. Make sure, look, you see that? I got some wobble there because this wasn't tight. And then, you know, just check that your stuff is tight, right? So on the tripod, we have no problems composing on the rear screen. And so there's an interesting image. The histogram looks good. Now the other thing that I'm going to do for stability is I'm going to put on the 2-second self timer. So there we go. And we shouldn't really have a problem because this shot is 1/25 of a second at f8 at ISO 125. But still, you can never be too stable, right? So there it is. I mean, I could have done that handheld, no problem, but for exemplary purposes, we used the tripod. Another thing that you can use instead of using the 2-second self timer. Now, obviously, this is for slower shutter speeds, right? If you don't want to, you know, if you want to time your shots, and when that is happening, is usually in a situation like when you're at the beach and you're trying to time the waves coming in. So you want to get just when the wave cracks over the rock, or just when the waves are coming up the beach in a particular way. Cable release like the one I have here. This is a cheap JJC cable release. They're like 10 bucks on Amazon. And that plugs into your camera, and it allows you to push the button and not shake the camera and get the shot specifically when you want the shot. So another thing to make sure is when you place your tripod, well, watch where your feet are going. This becomes a real problem at the beach. If the water is coming in and you're on wet sand, your tripod starts to sink, try to push it down. I knew a photographer used to bring old CDs with him, and he'd put the CDs down and then put the tripods in the little legs of the tripods in the little holes. That's kind of ridiculous, but it seemed to work for him. But it's something to think about. If you're on mud or shifting sand or an unstable surface and you're a little bit over to the side and it doesn't affect your composition, you can move and you're on a rock or something. That's much better. So another thing to consider is where you're placing the feet of your tripod. Keep that in mind. So these, I think they're Valore gloves. They're not cheap, but they're really high quality. The only thing is, as you've seen a couple of times, I forgot the do the strap up. And that is kind of I mean, I don't know if it's really necessary, but it makes the gloves just a little bit more annoying to use in the sense that like you undo that to take them on and off. But that's a tangent. Another thing to consider when you're on a tripod is you don't want a big wide camera strap blowing around in the breeze and making your camera shake. That's why the popularity, I don't know if you can see those little disky things on the camera there. Those are Peak Design anchor points, and they so you buy one camera strap, and then you can buy a bunch of these anchor points, put them on all your cameras. I have them on all my cameras. Then you can put your camera strap on and off, and you don't have to worry about it. So that's a big help there. I saw a couple of photographers say that you, in the wind or whatever, you shouldn't use your lens hood. I disagree with that. I think you should always use your lens hood whenever you can. The only time I don't is when I'm using filters that the lens hood doesn't fit over them. And even then I'm not happy about that. But your lens hood increases the contrast of your lens, and it makes your lens perform to a higher standard. So I think a lens hood is very important, and I never take it off. They're streamlined enough now. You know, if you had a big compendium lens hood like they used to use, those bellows ones, yeah, maybe that could be an issue. But I don't see this really causing that much of a problem in the wind. Maybe on a telephoto or something, but if the wind's blowing that bad, you're probably not getting the shot anyway. So just my thinking on it, I try to always use the lens hood. The next important thing to getting tack sharp images is to nail your focus. Now in landscape photography, we try to get usually, most of the time, everything in focus, from the nearest subject to the furthest subject, as much of the scene in focus as possible. And usually we do that by using a smaller aperture. And so like, for example, you know, f/22 is definitely going to give you more depth of field, more the near object and the far object are going to be in focus. Whereas f/28, like your depth of field, you know, you're just going to have a narrow band of in focus. And focal length affects that as well. A wide angle lens will give you more in focus than a telephoto lens, which compresses the focus, if I may use that term. So, for example, your depth of field on a 200 millimeter lens is going to be much smaller at f/22 than your depth of field on a 10 millimeter lens, where pretty much like from 2 feet to infinity is going to be in focus at f/22. Another caveat to that is we don't want to use f/22 because these modern cameras, particularly the high resolution ones, the 40 megapixel Fuji APS-C cameras, the 48 megapixel full frame cameras, 60 megapixel Sony cameras, etc. The high megapixel, high resolution cameras, a thing called diffraction kicks in, where pretty much like with the Fuji APS-C, the image quality degrades after about f5.6. Now I shoot at f8, f11. I haven't had a problem. I've gotten sharp images, but your images get worse the more you stop down. So that creates you're kind of getting squeezed in terms of depth of field versus diffraction. That's an age-old fight there. But to know where your diffraction kicks in. So if something is critical for me, that's why focus stacking has become such a big deal with these modern high-resolution sensors. And what focus stacking is you take an image focused at the near subject and you take an image focused at the far subject, and then you blend the two together. So you have a maximum depth of field and everything's in focus. And you do that in post-processing. Now, to be honest with you, even with the Fuji 40 megapixel sensors, I have bracketed in the field where I've had an image where I thought I had a near subject and a far subject, and I wasn't sure whether I was going to get them both tack sharp in one exposure. And so what I did is I took that exposure using like f11, and I thought everything would be in focus, but then I focused on the near subject and took a picture, and I focused on the far subject and took a photo, and then the plan was if the single image didn't work, I could blend those two together to get the correct focus. But so far, I don't have one image that I focus stack. Part of the reason for that is also with the Fuji cameras, you get this, so if I'm doing a near far kind of a thing where I need everything in focus from let's say 3 or 4 feet to infinity, the Fuji, what I will do is I'll put the Fuji into manual focus, my X-T5 into manual focus, or XH2 or X-T3, any of the Fujis do this. And then I'll get this beautiful bar graph with distances and a pointer where I'm focused, and then I'll get this blue line as I open and close the aperture, and that is simulating the depth of field. It's telling me it's a depth of field focus scale, and it's telling me from what distance to what distance is in focus. And so far it's worked a treat. Now to focus, I can manually focus and move it back and forth and get the maximum blue bar in the places where I want it. Or I can just hit the AF button on the back of the camera, which works in manual mode. Fuji has really thought this out, and that's why Fuji cameras are such a pleasure to use. I'm not saying other cameras don't do that, but I have used some that don't. And it's like, it's kind of like, wow, you know, these are really expensive cameras and they're not doing what Fuji's figured out. But I'm just saying, I'm not mentioning any brand names. And the third thing to ensure sharpness, I would say, is to know your lenses, know how your lenses perform, know where the zones of critical sharpness are for your lenses. I'll give you an example. My 16 to 55 Fuji Pro lens, f2.8, a big heavy lens, but I love it. It is pretty much sharp from 16 to 55, the whole 2/3 aspect ratio. It's sharp out into the corners, it's sharp edge to edge, no problem. I can shoot that lens at any aperture, of course taking into consideration diffraction, so I tend not to shoot it past f11 or f8. I try to aim for f5.6 if I can get away with it. But I can shoot that lens at any of those apertures and at any focal length, at any focusing distance. It is just sharp everywhere. My 18 to 55 lens, not so much. As a matter of fact, my 18 to 55 lens, I don't shoot in 2/3 aspect ratio because the edges of the frame aren't that sharp. So I prefer to shoot in a 4:5 aspect ratio or a 1:1 aspect ratio. And that's what I do with that lens because I know that it's just not that sharp. It's also not that sharp wide open at 2.8. I prefer to shoot it at f4 or f5.6 to stop it down a little bit. There's compromises to be made for having a smaller, lighter lens, right? Okay, but sometimes that's not a problem and it's preferred. Just know, I know through experience that that lens requires that mitigation of the edges. So I shoot in the 4:5 aspect ratio or the 1:1 aspect ratio square on my X-T5 XH2. So know your lenses, know what they're capable of doing. Like my 75 to 300, I'm comfortable with that lens everywhere. It's great. The 10 to 24, I tend to shoot it stop down. I tend not to shoot it at f4. So I tend to shoot f5.6, f8, f11. And my 10 to 24 on the X-T5 has worked perfectly. I'm confident in it. I like the lens a lot. A lot of people have said that 10 to 24 isn't up to it for the 40 megapixels. I think there's a lot of sample variation in those lenses. And if you get a good copy, it should deliver the goods. I think 3 of my images for my 2023 folio are taken with the 10 to 24, so I'm very happy with that lens. No problem at all. The consideration is keep your lenses clean, right? Keep the front element clean. This is a real issue with when you're photographing in snow or by a waterfall, the mist, the beach, whatever. That's why all my lenses have the highest quality, clear, multi-coated filter on the front of them because I don't mind repeatedly wiping a filter off. I'd prefer not to repeatedly wipe the front element of my lens off getting all wet. That's why I use filters. I run them forever, and all my lenses have filters on them. I rarely take them off. So because it's much more confidence inspiring if you need to clean your lens a lot, if you're shooting in a waterfall, that kind of a deal. So yeah. So small channels like mine need all the help they can get. and you can help me out tremendously. Doesn't cost you a penny. Just hit that subscribe button, hit that like button. That is just the #1 thing you can do if you enjoy this content, to show me that you liked it, because that's what I could really use for my channel, and I very much appreciate that. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you out here. Have a great one. Bye.